Hi, I'm Alisa Eagleston-Cieslewicz, and I'm the conservator here at SFO Museum. Today I'm going to be talking about how we preserve the Jim Lund collection of models. Probably the first and most important thing we can do for the Jim Lund Models collection is called preventive conservation. And preventive conservation focuses on identifying hazards and risks to the objects before they even occur and working to mitigate them before there's ever a problem. Probably the most important thing in preventive conservation of the Jim Lund models is keeping in mind that they're fragile objects with a lot of small and detachable parts. In that regard, the most important thing we can do is to make sure that those small and potentially detachable parts are handled and contacted as little as possible. In order to prevent those parts from detaching or becoming problematic or snagged or caught when we're working with the pieces, we create what's called a storage board, and I have an example of one here. This storage board or storage mount is something we use while the object is in our main storage area, while it's not on display, and it's used to hold the models safely so that they can be examined, handled, and transported as necessary. The plane sits in this custom-made cradle with the body of the airplane here in these indentations, and the wings of the airplane on the side blocks with the supports here. These cradles distribute the weight of the airplane very evenly, and they also keep pressure off of potentially fragile areas like landing gear or wing struts or other parts that maybe shouldn't take a great deal of weight. A nice feature of these storage boards is that they do minimize handling. Rather than handling the model or the aircraft, staff members can simply hold it by the sides of the storage board, and therefore nobody ever really has to contact the model ever unless they're doing something very specific with it. And that allows us to transport the models and move them around as necessary much more safely. In terms of the materials that these storage boards are made out of, they're made from an archival blue board, or it's essentially a cardboard structure. They're made from ethafoam, and this ethafoam is a polyethylene expanded foam that's used very commonly in museum applications. And then Tyvek strapping, and this is an archival grade Tyvek that can be cut into small pieces and attached to the ethafoam, and then also used as straps to hold down the model while it's in the caddy. And then the pins allow us to attach and reattach and adjust the straps as necessary. Another nice feature of these boards is that they allow us to record the accession number of the object, which allows us to track the object internally. And we can write handling notes to staff members directly on the board itself, and we have an example of one here. This particular note alerts staff members to the presence of wires on the top of the airplane, and because wires tend to be a particularly fragile aspect of these models, letting people know that they're there just tips people off and allows them to handle the airplane more safely. Other types of notes include information on fragile landing gear or areas of the plane that can't support weight or handling under any circumstances. Here we are in main storage of the museum, and this is where the Jim Lund models are located when they're not on view. They're usually located in this storage area, and as you can see, there's nothing here right now, and that's because they're all being prepared for exhibit. But another thing you'll notice about the space is that we have it covered in these plastic dust cloths. And what this plastic sheeting allows us to do is really restrict the amount of dust that contacts the objects while they're in storage. By restricting the amount of dust that's able to enter their storage space, we reduce the need for cleaning for the objects over their lifetime. And by reducing the need for cleaning, we reduce the number of times that the objects are contacted and handled. And this allows us to mitigate the potential for damage that occurs as the result of cleaning. And this is another preventative conservation strategy that helps us to keep the objects safe. Here we have an example of the kind of tray we use for temporary storage of the models. In it, you'll see 5 models that are already prepared for the exhibit. They're on their exhibit mounts. And the tray is used to safely transport them to and from the exhibit site, or to serve as a temporary storage location while they're in the design lab or elsewhere in the storage area. We restrict dust inflow to the tray using a tray lid. This also prevents inadvertent mechanical damage. Staff training is another important aspect of preventive conservation. Before any exhibit here at SFO Museum, all of the staff members who will be involved in handling, mounting, or exhibiting the objects get together and discuss any potential condition issues or hazards associated with the objects before we even get started. And this is really important because it allows staff members to learn about any hazards and to really get out ahead of any potential problems. For the Jim Lund Models exhibit, one thing we really focused on was the fragility of the pieces and the potential for mechanical damage. So we alerted staff members to things like fragile landing gear, or wires, or antennae that could be easily damaged inadvertently during the handling process. Cleaning is another type of active conservation we perform here at SFO Museum. And typically this involves removing any accumulated dirt or dust or potentially accretions or splatter from objects that we see here in the conservation area. I have one of the models here to show you some examples of some of the active conservation treatments we perform on the objects while they're with us in the conservation department. The first thing we can perform is cleaning, and usually this just involves loose dust removal. We often do that with a soft brush and sometimes in combination with a HEPA-equipped vacuum cleaner. Dusting essentially consists of sweeping the loose dust away from the object. Do this very carefully. Particularly in order to avoid disrupting any wires, propellers, decals, or other parts that may be loose or fragile. Cleaning is active conservation. It means that we're contacting the object, we're handling the object, and we're applying usually either a brush or another dry cleaning method or even a solvent to the surface of the object. Wet cleaning is usually performed when there are more stubborn surface deposits of dirt or accretions. And wet cleaning is performed usually with a cotton swab that's been dampened with an appropriate solvent. Solvents are chosen through extensive testing and are chosen to not disrupt or damage or otherwise alter the surface of the model. A lot of the Lund models were cleaned in preparation for the exhibit, but we hope with the dust control and the precautions we'll take going forward, that going forward really all the objects will need is a quick little brush, and that will be it. One type of treatment that I commonly perform here in conservation is the reattachment of small detached parts on models. In this case, I have a small propeller blade that's detached from the outermost propeller on this particular object. What I'm going to be doing is introducing a small amount of adhesive and then stabilizing the piece as the adhesive dries. So in this case, you can see that the propeller is actually slightly loose kind of in and of itself. So I'm going to be stabilizing the propeller just using some temporary ethafoam blocks. And then I'll be reattaching the propeller. The adhesives we use here in the conservation department are all conservation grade and widely studied conservation use adhesives. And they're also designed to be either reversible or retreatable. So that means that they can be removed from the object if necessary, and the object can be retreated later if this repair fails for any reason. And often as the adhesive dries, I will place some additional supports to make sure that the piece dries at an appropriate angle. Sometimes when I'm reattaching a detached fragment, I use Mr. Lund's photographs to help me. I use the photographs to determine the correct location of the piece, or potentially the correct angle or positioning. And this helps me to make sure that my repair is accurate to the original look of the object. Another form of active conservation we perform here is called consolidation. And that involves using adhesive to set down areas of models that are lifting or flaking in some way. And usually that just means stabilizing decals. And we do that with a conservation grade adhesive as we find the condition. All of the conservation treatments here at SFO Museum are accompanied by documentation. Documentation typically consists of both before and after treatment photographs, as well as a written record of the conservation treatment. The written record of the conservation treatment details exactly what steps we took to conserve the object and what materials we used in the process. This allows us to treat the object again if necessary, and it allows us to maintain an ongoing record of changes in the object's condition over time. As we look to the future of caring for these models, we like to think about how they're likely to deteriorate over time. Things that are important to think about are the composition of the plastics used in the models, the paints, and the adhesives that were used to hold them together. An interview with Mr. Lund was instrumental in helping us understand the materials used in the model airplanes. He described the plastics he used, his adhesives, and the paints he used in the process of making the models.
I use all kinds of paint. I use acrylic, I use oil, I use watercolors, I use every kind of a paint they've got. I use anything that I can achieve the coloration I want.
This helps us as conservators understand how the planes are likely to deteriorate over time. Photo documentation is also important. We generate photo documentation as part of the conservation and registration process, and we use Mr. Lund's photos. These photos allow us to track the condition of the objects over time and also give us important clues about the deterioration of the objects that we can use to help care for them in the future.
Thank you for joining me today to learn about the conservation of the Jim Lund Model Collection.